Hi, seventh graders. We are going to talk a little bit about how to solve some problems involving percent of a number. So the first thing that you need to know is that percent literally means per 100. So anytime if you wanted to figure out how to write a percent as a fraction, you're going to put that percent over 100, which you could also think of then as a division problem. So if you divide that percent by 100, then that'll give you your decimal form as well. Every percent problem that we're going to look at is going to have three pieces to it. So there's going to be a part, a whole, and a percentage. And two of those pieces will be given to you, and then you'll need to find the third one. So the first thing that you want to do is identify the pieces you have and what you're missing. So one way that we can do this is we can use what we call the percent proportion, which says that our part over the whole is going to equal the percent over 100. And again, percent means per 100. That's why we can always put it over 100. So this is one way. We've also talked about other ways to think of this as well. So if we think of our percent, the part over the whole equals the percent. If you look down here, all right, if I were to multiply both sides of that equation by the whole, then I would be just left with the part is going to equal the percent times the whole. So whatever you do to one side of an equation, you do to the other. So if I multiply by the whole over here, now I just have the part by itself. And so we could think the percent times the whole is going to equal that part. So let's look at some examples, and then we will talk about how you can solve each of these problems a variety of ways. So what number is 55% of 80? So the first thing you're going to want to do, first thing I normally look for is I usually look to see if I have a percentage, okay? Because if I have a percent, remember we have three pieces, the part, the whole, and the percentage. So the percent is pretty easy to find if you have it, okay? Because it will have a percent symbol. And then now I need to decide, am I given the part or the whole? So what number is 55% of 80? This means equal. So the what number means that this is my variable. And then 55% of 80. When we take part of something, that typically represents multiplication. And so then there's a couple of ways that I could look at this problem. So I need to be multiplying 55% times 80. Or because I'm taking part of 80, then that also tells me that 80 is going to be the whole in this problem. So if I look at these equations, three of these equations will actually help me figure out 55% of 80. So over here, the first one we have is 55 hundredths times 80. Well, 55 hundredths is our 55% in its decimal form times 80, and then that would give us the part. So that would be one strategy that we could use to figure out 55% of 80. If we look at the second equation, I have 11/20ths, which is also equivalent to 55%. So again, I'm taking my 55% times 80, which would give me my part. And then if we look at this last example, I have my 55 over 100 because it's the percentage, and then my 80 is the whole, so it's a denominator, and so I'm trying to solve for the part in that percent proportion. So that would be another way that you could do it, okay? Another way that you could think of this problem, because you have the percentage and you have the whole, you could also use some of your percent shortcuts to try to help you. So you could figure out 50% of 80 pretty easily, and then figure out your 5% of 80 as well, okay? But what I want you guys to understand is that there's multiple strategies to solve each of these problems. You might solve a problem differently than somebody else, and you might even change the way that you solve the problem from problem to problem. So 24 is 60% of what number? So when we look at this next one, again, three of these equations are going to help us figure this out, and one of them will not. So I want to look, and I see a percent, so I know I have my percentage, all right? And then it says 24 is 60% of what number? So here, this is saying that 24 equals 60% of something. Remember that of, we can, that's usually going to be indicating that we're multiplying times something. So we need to take 60% times something, we don't know what, is going to equal 24. And so on this one, the 24 is going to be my part. And the of what number is my whole, which I don't have yet. So when we look at different strategies to solve this one, I have the first one, I have my percent proportion. 24 is the part over the whole, which I don't know yet, is equal to 60 over 100. So that would be one strategy you could use to solve. On the next one, I have the 24 is equal to that 60% as it in its decimal form times the whole. So that would be something that would work. And also if we look, I'm going to skip the third one. If we look at the last one, 24 is equal to 3/5 times W. 3/5 is 60% in fraction form. So that one would work as well. So, and then that third one there would not, okay? This would work if 24 was our part and 60 was the whole. So again, one of the main ideas that I want you to take away is that there's lots of different strategies to solve all of these different percent problems. And you may change up your strategy from problem to problem. You might do it differently than someone else. And as long as you're correctly able to identify your part and your whole and set up the problem in a way that works for you, you are going to be just fine. So we're going to come up with at least a couple of different ways here to solve each of these problems. So 90 is 18% of what number? When I look at this, I see my percent. So I'm going to box that so that I know I have that. And then I need to decide, is that 90 my part or my whole? So 90 is the 18%. So remember, this is like saying 90 is equal to the 18%. So then that tells me that 90 is my part and is 18% of what number? So that means I'm missing the whole. And so now we're just looking at different ways to set up the same problem. So I could use my percent proportion. I'll always have a denominator of 100 if I do that, because we're dealing with percents. So 18%, my percent always goes over 100. If 90 is my part, then that would be my numerator. And then of what number, so I'm missing the whole, so then that would be my variable. So one way that we could do this would be to solve this proportion. Another way we could think of this would be, I know that 90 equals or is 18%. Now I can think of that 18% either as a decimal or a fraction. So 0.18 or 18 hundredths. And then of my whole, which I don't know, so times W. So then once you have either of these set up, then it's just a matter of solving. So a couple of things on my proportion, we could use our cross products. So you could say 90 times 100 has to equal 18x. And then you would have 9,000 and divide that by 18 to get your answer. I also see that 18 times 5 is going to be 90, so I could take 100 times 5 and solve it that way. And then if I look at this equation, 90 is equal to 18 hundredths times W. My goal of an equation is to try to get that variable by itself. So since W is being multiplied times 0.18, I could divide both sides by 0.18. And that would also give me my answer, which is going to be 500. So again, once we have the equation set up, there's many ways that we can think of solving that problem. If we look at this one, what number is 24% of 80? So again, I see a percent. So I'm going to box that. And then now it says what number is 24% of 80? So on this one, I actually have the whole, so 80 is representing my whole. And I'm trying to figure out what the part is that's equal to that. So again, we have a variety of ways we can set up the problem to solve it. I can use the percent proportion. 24 is my percent, so it automatically goes over 100. If 80 is my whole, that's my denominator. And then I'm solving for my part. So I could use that proportion and then use one of my proportion solving strategies. We could use cross products. We could try simplifying the 24 100ths and use that information to give us an equivalent ratio. We can also set up an equation here. So I don't know the part, but I know whatever that part is equal to the 24% of 80. And remember, this of tells us that we're going to be multiplying. So I could do 24% times 80. And when I do that, I want to make sure that my 24% is in either decimal form or fraction form. So I could take 24 hundredths times 80. I could also write 24% as a fraction and think of it that way. So that would be 24 hundredths, and then if we simplified, I'd end up getting 6/25 times 80 would be another way that we could solve for that part. Some of you had a problem similar to this, and you were also using your percent shortcuts. So some of you guys were able to figure out, okay, well, 20% of 80, 10% of 80 is 8, so 20% was 16. And then once you were able to do that, you figured out 4%, so you knew that 1% was going to be 0.8. And then you multiplied that times 4 to get 3.2. And then you guys were able to solve that to get 19.2. So again, every problem has a variety of ways that you can solve it. You just need to find the way that makes the most sense to you. We're going to skip that mistake error analysis right now. That's something that would be good for you to look at on your own. So find 20% of 45. When I look here, I have my percent and my 45 of 45. That's telling me this is the whole. And so I'm trying to figure out the part. And so again, this one, we know percent shortcuts. So 20% of 45, I could set up a percent proportion. I could set up an equation. I could also say, well, I know 10% is going to be 4.5. And so 20% would be 4.5 times 2, which would be 9. So if you can do it in your head, I would still encourage you to use percent shortcuts, but some of them you won't be able to. Let's look at a couple of more. What percent, let's look at number 4. What percent of 300 is 51? So on this one, I actually don't see a percent. It's asking me what percent. So that tells me that in my proportion, if I was going to be using the proportion, that's where my variable would be. It would be x over 100. And then I need to figure out, okay, the 300 and the 51, which one's my part and which one's my whole. So it says what percent of 300. So usually your whole is going to be coming after that word of. So this is my whole. And then 50, which makes 51 my part. And so then I'll end up with 51 over 300 is equal to x over 100. And then once you have the problem set up, again, don't just always default to your calculator. If you see a relationship that you can use, then use that. So for example, you could use cross products to solve this, but I also see that 300 divided by 3